Hello and welcome to Simply Balanced, the podcast where we dive into, all things balanced. I'm your host, Taylor Grosso, a registered dietitian with a passion to helping you find your unique balance girl aesthetic in this often hectic world. Each episode will explore different facets of living a balanced life, whether it's unraveling the latest nutrition trends, discovering mindful eating strategies, or discussing tips for a balanced lifestyle that fits your routine. Balance isn't about perfection, it's about making choices that feel right for you, nurturing your body and mind, and enjoying life's simple pleasures. So whether you're sipping your morning coffee, heading out for a walk, or winding down for the evening, I'm thrilled to have you join me. So let's dive in and talk, all things balanced. Hello, besties, and welcome back to another episode of Simply Balanced. As usual, I am so glad that you are here, and thank you for continuing to support me on this podcasting journey. Seriously, this is one of my favorite parts of my job, and I love doing this every single week. This week's topic, we're going to be talking about something that you've probably seen circulating the internet a lot lately, because I know that I've seen it on my algorithm, and that is the term balancing hormones. Because the reality is, when we're talking about hormones and talking about the endocrine system, there is a lot of individuality that goes around on there. So I wanted to just dive a little deeper into what hormones we could potentially be talking about. 2, what does balancing your hormones actually even mean? And 3, how to differentiate if someone is actually trying to help you or just simply sell you something that probably isn't going to do anything for your hormones. So let's dive on in and talk all things hormones. So I'm guessing you've probably seen it on your timeline as much as I've seen it on my timeline this year, but this term balancing your hormones, right? Everybody's talking about it, especially in terms of the wellness industry. And I think that it's really risen in popularity, especially within like the past 2 or 3 years, because I think there's been a trend with cycle syncing. I think there's been a trend in coming off of birth control. I think there's been a rise in PCOS diagnosis. I think there's been a rise in fertility and in infertility. And I think it's making women a little bit nervous because honestly, we're not really educated on our hormones. Like, a lot of us don't even know how our cycle works, and that's not our fault. Like, when you think back to your 5th grade health class that you did in terms of puberty, in terms of sex, in terms of all of these things, no one taught us what actually happens to our bodies during our menstrual cycle and how that literally impacts almost every component of our daily lives. But the concerning part about this whole balancing your hormones trend is that a lot of people who are promoting that they can balance your hormones, quote unquote, are wellness influencers that don't have a lot of credentials. And now I am not saying that there are not reputable sources out there that are talking about this specific topic, but a lot of what I've seen is that it's mostly a marketing scam that's largely targeted at us as females to sell some sort of supplement program and or nutrition protocol. Now, here's the basic nitty gritty is that when we think about the endocrine system, so the endocrine system is the system in your body that basically operates all of your hormones. It is incredibly complex and bio-individual, which basically just means that every single person's hormone fluctuations are going to be different. There are over 50 different hormones that are fluctuating up and down at all times. So when someone is on the internet promoting that they can quote unquote balance your hormones, 1, what the fuck are they even talking about? And 2, are they even mentioning a singular hormone that they're supposedly balancing? Because I think that that's the really big thing that I'm seeing in terms of people talking about this whole balancing your hormone concept is that they're saying that XYZ balances your hormones, but what hormone are you talking about? Are you talking about my sex hormones, estrogen and progesterone? Are you talking about my hunger and fullness hormones, ghrelin and leptin? Are you talking about cortisol, which is your stress hormone? Are they talking about insulin, which is the component that helps with blood sugar balance? What exactly are you talking about? And I think that is the most concerning thing when it comes to this trend. And so that's why I really wanted to break this down, because I feel like when I am talking with women or working with women, and when we are kind of talking about hormones, whether it's related to a diagnosis like PCOS, bad periods, coming off of birth control, and honestly too, there's a lot of hormones tied into a restrictive dieting path. And those are a lot of the ones that I'm going to kind of touch on today. But I think a big differentiating factor that we need to kind of lean into in this balancing hormone trend is that balancing hormones doesn't really make sense. your hormones are probably never going to be in exact equilibrium just because of the way in which science works. And especially for us as females, we have hormones that are fluctuating throughout the course of the month based on our cycle at literally all times. They're never all going to be exactly perfect and exactly where they need to be. So instead, what I like to talk a lot about is how can we support the different hormones that are in our body. And I think that that's a much better terminology to refer to this quote unquote wellness trend as, is figuring out ways that we can support our hormones. And just so you know, none of the ones that I'm going to talk about today have literally anything to do with a supplement, a protocol, or a program. I am going to talk about how you can do it from a nutritional standpoint and support it via food, because there are different foods that can support a variety of different components of our bodies. We know this. Foods are nutrient dense. They have a ton of benefits. That's one of the ways in which we try to switch that mindset to how food can benefit our body, rather than looking at food that's something that's a negative and just calories in and calories out. There are so many facets to how food can support us, especially for us as females. And I know I have some males listening, so don't worry, I'm not trying to discredit you guys either. But the hormones that I am going to be talking about today, and because I see this trend being more targeted at females specifically, I think that it's really important to talk about the way in which our hormones cycle. And also, at some point, I think it's going to be like a couple episodes from now, I am going to dive into cycle syncing and like kind of my journey with birth control as well. So we'll talk a lot more about like the cycle specific hormones. We're going to touch a little bit on them today, but we're not going to talk about how they actually like fluctuate throughout the course of the month. We're more so going to touch on the 6 hormones that I find myself talking about the most when I am working with women, especially women who have come from either a dieting or a caloric restriction past. And when we talk about like actually knowing where your hormone levels are at, obviously when it comes to marketing, people are trying to solve a problem, right? Like you are trying to figure out what your audience's problem is, and then you are kind of honing in on that and then creating a solution to that problem, and then that's what you're selling, and that's how you're captivating the audience. Well, when it comes to this balancing hormone trend, and like I mentioned, a rise in PCOS, a rise in infertility, I think that people are pulling symptoms, things like fatigue, stress, digestion issues, like a lot of these common things that we're seeing that are happening to women that I actually could argue tie a little bit more into our relationship with food, the mentality that we have around food and exercise, our dieting and restrictive past. I think that a lot of those can actually be kind of tied into that overall. But what we're tying them back to is these symptoms. And then whatever the supplement protocol or the nutrition protocol, whatever it is, we are then saying, if you do this, it will solve all of your problems. And when you're dealing with a lot of those symptoms like chronic fatigue or struggling with weight gain, which by the way, I still don't give a shit about, but I know everybody else does, so that's why I always have to bring it up, or struggling with not realizing your hunger and fullness cues, or feeling constantly burnt out and stressed. Like a lot of these things, when you hear that a supplement might magically make these things go away, why would you not want to try it? But that's what I want to talk about today, is how to differentiate that and actually know, is this supplement legit? And one of the first places that you can start if you feel like your hormones are imbalanced or not where they are supposed to be, and or you just don't feel like you are supporting them in the best way, what I would highly recommend before you dive into any supplement, any nutrition protocol, is getting them actually tested so that you truly know what you need to be supporting and how you can support it. Most of these hormones can be tested at a doctor's office just via a simple blood sample. I will say that there are some that I'm going to talk about today that would require some sort of special testing, and you will typically have to ask for them. Even progesterone and estrogen, which are the 2 main sex hormones that are tied to the female menstrual cycle, they're ones that are often tested when you get to the point of like infertility, for example. If you want to have those tested just to see where they are, one, you need to make sure that you're looking into where you're at in your cycle, because the other thing is too, a lot of these are dependent on where you are at in your cycle, and they need to be tested at a certain time and date in order to get the most accurate reading, quote unquote, of what they are. That's more so specific to that estrogen and progesterone, and you can ask your OBGYN all of these questions if it's something that you're wanting to look into. Now, There's also a couple of other ones like cortisol, for example, that can be measured via saliva test or even a urine analysis, because cortisol levels are ones that shift throughout the course of the day. So you have rises and falls in your cortisol, which is your stress hormone. That's the one that you hear everybody talking about in terms of stress and inflammation and all of these different things. And I think I talked about this a little bit on the last episode as well, but I want to hone in on it again because I think that we're misinterpreting cortisol in a way, because you are supposed to have spikes in your cortisol, okay? I think that a lot of the times you hear like, oh, we don't want to spike our cortisol on the internet, but that's not true. When you're spiking your cortisol, your body is learning how to adapt and building resilience to stress. Like any form of exercise that you do, unless it's super, super low intensity, you're probably gonna have some sort of cortisol spike. And then your body learns to adapt and be more resilient, which then helps you to continue to advance, whether that's endurance, whether that's strength-wise. We want our cortisol levels to go up and down. What we don't want when it comes to cortisol is chronic cortisol, where that cortisol is not coming down. It is just staying at a constant high level. And where we see that happening in scientific research a lot is women who are under eating and over exercising. That's putting a ton of stress on your body. And something that I say all the time too, because we have these grocery store walkers that are telling us that every food is toxic and poisonous and horrible for you. It is going to cause inflammation, cortisol, blah, 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 blah. But you know what is more stressful to your body than any singular ingredient that you're going to put in it? Is stressing about every damn morsel of food that's going into your mouth. That is creating such a different dynamic within your body than having a serving of fucking Doritos. It's not the end of the world, I promise you. And no, once again, to all, I don't feel like my trolls listen to my podcast, but the FDA is not paying me to say that either. I get asked that all the time. I'm like, no, the FDA is not paying me. I don't know. Everybody got mad at me when I said the government workers make a lot of money and maybe the FDA would pay me a lot of money to pay me off. I have no clue, but I've never earned a single cent from the FDA. And I just want to reiterate this because I think that a lot of people have such an all or nothing mindset when it comes to nutrition and when it comes to like what I've seen in this holistic health rise, I guess, is like you have to throw away everything in your life that has a dye, it has a paraben, it has a sulfate, whatever it is. And it's like, you don't. Everything in moderation. The poison is in the dose. I say this all the time. Water, literally water, can be toxic to you at certain levels. So just recognizing that like these things are all very individual, and I think a lot of the times we're doing it or talking about it from a very broad standpoint, which is not really doing anybody any sort of benefit, which I kind of just went on a tangent, but kind of circling back to all of that leads me to say, if you are wanting to check in on your hormones and potentially support them in a better way, I highly, highly, highly recommend going to a doctor, going to an OBGYN, and asking for these things to get tested, because there is no point in putting all this pressure on yourself to quote unquote balance your hormones if all of yours are perfectly in check. And if you still have other symptoms that you feel like are related to hormones, there might be another root cause in a way that you can support your body in a very beneficial way, which is all of the things that we're going to talk about today, is how can you best support your body in order to encourage this hormone production in a positive way. Now, like I mentioned, I'm going to talk about 6 hormones specifically. They're the 6 hormones that I find myself talking about the most often with women. So the first 2 that we're going to talk about are leptin and ghrelin. So leptin is your fullness and satiety hormone, and then ghrelin is your hunger hormone. Now, if you listen to a couple of my last episodes, you probably know this because I've talked about them a lot in relation to restrictive dieting and how restrictive dieting for long periods of time can really have a negative impact on these 2 hormones. And if you are a woman who has dieted for a long period of time, and I hear this all the time from the women that I work with, is that they don't feel their hunger and fullness anymore. And that's because when you are restrictively dieting, these things are down regulated, especially leptin, so that satisfaction and fullness hormone. So when you're giving yourself that permission to enjoy food, whether that's on the weekend or on a cheat day or whatever it is with that all or nothing mindset, it is going to be really, really hard to recognize when you're actually reaching that level of fullness and satisfaction because your body has down regulated this hormone for so long. And so I know I kind of already said this, but I want to give like a scientific definition of what leptin is. So leptin helps to regulate the energy balance by inhibiting hunger, which in turn reduces fat storage in the adipocytes. So once again, leptin is just really signaling your body, nope, we're full and satisfied. We don't really need any energy at this current moment, because a gentle reminder that that's what food is. Food provides our body with energy, and it's not something that should be feared. So when it comes to leptin specifically, the biggest concern surrounding leptin is that dieting. Because especially if you're in that significant caloric deficit to the point where you are below that basal metabolic rate, and if you're unfamiliar with that term and this is the first episode that you're listening to, I would highly encourage you to go back and listen to the metabolism episode where I broke down all of the components of the metabolism. But when you're in that significant caloric restriction below that basal metabolic rate or metabolism, it can lead to that decrease in the leptin levels, which then can lead to increased hunger and potentially lead to weight regain. Because what oftentimes happens when we're in these yo-yo dieting cycles is that when you're in that severe caloric restriction and then the leptin is down regulated, you are now at a point where once you give up on that diet, your metabolism has been down regulated and your satisfaction and fullness hormones are down regulated. So when you resume your normal eating patterns, the likelihood that you're going to end up regaining weight, which is why we see this constant yo-yo cycle of women going in and out of diet phases, because you get so restrictive and then you get to the point where you get fed up and then you give up on it and then you decide to go back to eating, in your normal routine, but now your metabolism is slower, your satisfaction and fullness is harder to recognize. And I think that that's something that's really important to talk about, because that is why, honestly, truly, when we get down to the nitty gritty, that is why diets don't work, because it is going to throw off that internal cue with your body so significantly. And then shifting over to talking more about ghrelin. So I always like to say that how I remember ghrelin, or your hunger hormone, is that it sounds like growling, like your stomach's growling. I don't have a fun little ad lib. Is that the right word? That's what came to my head. I don't think that's right. But I don't have a fun little ad lib to remember leptin. But as much as I talk about it, you guys will probably remember it. When it comes to ghrelin, it's known as the hunger hormone. It helps to stimulate appetite, it increases food intake, and it also promotes fat storage. Now, don't take that in a way of, oh my God, I never want to feel hungry because it promotes fat storage. That is something that has to do with genetics. It has a lot to do with the way in which ghrelin is actually functioning. That's not something that we're concerned about. It's more so signaling your body that it needs energy. Where we can see that increase in fat storage or the increase in adipocytes, and once again, I'm talking about all of this from a scientific level. I do not give a shit about weight gain or weight loss, okay? So when we're talking about it from that sense, where that concern can more so lie is within that leptin, right? Because the leptin, if it is down regulated and not functioning, and the ghrelin is up regulated, the likelihood that once again that weight regain post calorie restriction is going to happen is a lot higher. So levels of ghrelin also increase when you're dieting, which is basically what I was just kind of saying. And that can make, one, sticking to a diet more challenging, and then two, can lead to those increased feelings of hunger. And I think too, something that can happen is that hunger almost becomes something that's really scary, because when you don't have activation or access to that ghrelin hormone at significant levels, and it becomes really hard to recognize when you're full and satisfied, feeling hungry feels really scary, because you oftentimes get those urges to binge or overindulge and you don't know how to stop because you just don't know how to get to that satisfaction level. And so something that can actually help with ghrelin levels and supporting your ghrelin and leptin levels is, one, consistent eating, right? Intuitive eating is something that can really help, because you actually learn to recognize and honor your hunger and fullness signals. And then when you eat in response to your physical hunger and stop when you're comfortably full, it can help to regulate these hormones naturally, because the more consistently you eat, the more balanced your blood sugar is, which is another one that we're going to get into. And the more often your body can trust and rely on the fact that it is going to get consistent energy, which means that it is going to signal you when it's hungry and it's going to signal you when it's satisfied. And I know that I talk a lot about intuitive eating from this very simple principle of eat when you're hungry and stop when you're full. But the reality is there's so much more to it than that. And a lot of what has to do with the extended component is the mindset shift that you have around food. Because I think that a lot of people get very concerned that, well, if I eat when I'm hungry and I stop when I'm full, then I'm just going to eat a whole sleeve of Oreos, I'm going to eat a pint of ice cream, and I'm going to eat an entire pizza. And the question that I will ask you in those specific scenarios is, okay, then do that. And then I want you to recognize, how do you feel mentally and physically after that? Because a major component of intuitive eating, especially in the beginning when you don't have a lot of access to these hunger and fullness hormones, or you're just not in tune with them and you haven't been looking for them for the last however many years you've been stuck in that yo-yo dieting cycle, then you don't really understand how to tap into them in that way. And so being able to recognize that intuitive eating also involves this component of recognizing, how does food actually make me feel? And how does different foods in different portions make me feel? Like, for example, maybe a bowl of ice cream makes me feel really good because I'm satisfied. It's what I was craving. I wanted cold, I wanted creamy, I wanted sweet, and that hit it just right. But having the whole pint of ice cream doesn't make me feel good because it's a lot more than what my body really truly needs. But in that moment, it's hard for me to recognize that. But then you can break that down even further from the standpoint of, okay, so I ate the whole pint of ice cream, because another thing too about intuitive eating, you can't do it wrong. I think a lot of people think that because of dieting, you can do it wrong, right? Like, if you go over on your calories on MyFitnessPal, it's going to turn red, right? And if you eat off your plan, you're technically doing it wrong. Intuitive eating, what I like to say is that if you feel like you did it wrong, quote unquote, it was probably a learning lesson. And changing that mindset and that framework helps to give yourself grace and learning to understand your body again, because it takes time to do that. It's not something that happens overnight. And so I just want you to remind yourself of that, because you can look at your day and be like, okay, so tonight I ended up overindulging in a full pint of ice cream, and I don't feel very good mentally and physically after that. Did I eat enough throughout the course of the day? Did I have carbohydrates at most of my meals and snacks? Did I have fiber throughout the course of my day? Did I have protein at my meals and snacks? Did I maybe skip breakfast this day? And then starting to notice trends and how different foods and different portions, different macronutrients, micronutrients make you feel can help you figure out a routine that's going to best support your specific hunger and fullness hormones, to where you feel really good in those moments of recognizing that hunger and recognizing that fullness and satisfaction. And now we're going to shift into one that honestly kind of ties into everything that we were just talking about, which is insulin. So insulin is a hormone that is released from your pancreas, helps to control blood sugar levels by allowing cells into the muscle, fat, and liver to absorb glucose from the blood to be used for energy. So essentially how I like to explain insulin is that when you are eating a carbohydrate source, and if you have like a type 1 diabetic, because my husband's type 1 diabetic, so he like takes exogenous insulin, you know a lot about insulin already. Essentially how insulin works is when you eat a carbohydrate, it does not matter what type of carbohydrate it is ultimately going to break down into glucose in its simplest form, which is sugar. That's going to go into your bloodstream, and then the goal is for that to be captured by insulin. So insulin is going to, when that blood sugar hits the bloodstream, or the sugar hits the bloodstream, that's going to signal your pancreas to release insulin. Insulin kind of works as like a little capturer, is what I like to say, and then it goes and grabs that sugar from the blood, and then it transports it to wherever it needs to go. So it's going to transport it to the muscle to be converted to energy. It's going to transport it to the brain to be utilized as energy. It can also transport it to the liver to be stored for later energy. And then any food in excess, not just carbohydrates, any food in excess is going to then be transferred into fat for storage for later use. So that's kind of what that scientific definition means when it's broken down. So you might have been told that you were insulin resistant or that you have insulin sensitivity or prediabetes. These are all terms that a lot of people then kind of learn. Okay, so what is insulin and what does insulin resistance actually mean? So insulin resistance basically means that your blood sugar cells are resistant to that insulin. So your blood sugar is not getting captured and taken into your cells the way in which it's supposed to. Instead, it's continuing to circulate in your bloodstream. Now, the reason, because I don't feel like a lot of doctors really explain this, and if you're a doctor who does explain it, I love you and thank you for that, because a lot of my clients will come to me and they're like, yeah, I've been diagnosed with insulin resistance, but I don't know what that means and no one's ever told me. And so essentially how I like to explain that is the reason that we can be concerned about your blood sugar kind of circulating in your body and not getting transported to the cells to be utilized for energy is because, one, when blood sugar is transported into the cells to be utilized for energy, that helps to also signal your body, oh, we've ate, we have energy, we don't need to tap into, whatever it is to pull more energy out. We also don't necessarily need to feel hungry because we have a sufficient amount of energy and it's entered the cells and where it's supposed to go. And then also when we have this blood sugar circulating, and now I don't want to scare anybody, but if you have it circulating at really high levels, this is where we get to, like, if you've heard the term A1C before, A1C actually measures your blood sugar levels over the course of 3 months versus when you get just a blood sugar reading done at the doctor, that is like an in the moment blood sugar. A1C measures your blood sugar balance over the course of 3 months. So it gives us a better look into like what your blood sugar looks like on a day-to-day basis. So those are the differentiating factors in that component. But essentially, when we have too much glucose circulating in our bloodstream at really high levels for a very long period of time, I want to emphasize the very long period of time, that blood or that sugar can actually have a negative impact on a variety of different cells in our body. So it can have a negative impact on your cardiovascular health. It can have a negative impact on your nerve cells. It can have a negative impact on a variety of things. That's why you'll see, like, with type 2 or type 1 diabetics, type 1 typically, if it's uncontrolled, actually if it's uncontrolled for both type 1 or type 2, meaning that they are not focusing on balancing out their blood sugar levels to the best of their ability and they have these constant high blood sugars, you'll see that they get stuff like neuropathy where they can't feel their hands or their fingers. They might get foot sores or ulcers. You also might see a higher instance of cardiovascular disease. You might see a higher instance of inflammation in the body. So what we want to just make sure when we're focusing on kind of, I guess, supporting or promoting insulin is actually focusing on, one, choosing those low glycemic index carbohydrates more often. So low glycemic index carbohydrates are also often talked about as complex carbohydrates, which basically just means that they have, I like to call them complex because they have little friends with them. So they not only have carbohydrates, but they also have fiber, and a lot of the times they have a lot of vitamins and minerals, like B vitamins, for example. And they also typically have just a little bit more protein than their white bread or more simple carbohydrate counterpart. Now, that does not make one good or bad. We're just talking about how to best support insulin resistance or best support blood sugar balance within the body. And eating these foods that contain fiber and protein is going to help to balance out blood sugar levels because essentially, like I mentioned, we process carbs super freaking fast. And so when that glucose gets into our bloodstream, it happens very, very quickly. And then if our body's able to utilize it super, super quick, then we are not going to have, you're going to get that blood sugar spike and then you're going to get that blood sugar crash. That's what we're trying to avoid. We want to create this more sustained energy level. Now, is that to say that you're never going to have a blood sugar spike and a blood sugar crash? No, like that is going to happen, and that's okay. What we don't want is chronic ups and downs. Once again, the poison is in the dose. We want to try to balance out our blood sugar levels to the best of our ability most of the time. The reality is, if you try to focus on being perfect, you're probably going to end up being perfect 50% of the time versus focusing on being consistent 80% of the time. That is what I tell all my clients. That is one of the best ways to kind of remove that all or nothing mindset, is recognizing that, like, if I'm 50% perfect, there's also half the time where I don't feel like I'm meeting those expectations or those goals because I'm putting so much pressure on myself the other 50% of the time to be perfect, versus realizing that you can just be consistent 80% of the time. So much easier on both the mental and physical health. But kind of circling back to those low glycemic index foods is the fact that they contain this protein and fiber, and that sugar gets into the bloodstream very quickly. Fiber and protein help to slow down the release of that sugar into the bloodstream. Helps to give your insulin more time to go capture it and get it to where it needs to go. It also benefits your body in a variety of other different ways. Fiber is super important for gut health. I talk about this on my page all the time, but it is the year of fiber. Only 5% of Americans get their recommended daily amount of fiber. And if you want to do something beneficial for your gut health, my goodness, one of the best things that you can do is increase your fiber consumption. And when we're talking about these more low glycemic index foods, like I mentioned, fruits, most non-starchy vegetables, so things like broccoli, cauliflower, all of those types of things are going to be very fibrous. And then we also have things like whole grains, so things like whole wheat bread, we've got popcorn, whole wheat tortillas, whole wheat pasta. Once again, that is not to say that the white counterparts are something that you can never have, but if you can aim to make about half of the grains that you eat whole grains, so one night you've got white pasta, but you really like whole wheat bread, that's a perfect example of kind of mixing it half and half. Pick and choose what grains you really enjoy to a certain level in different forms, and then try to make around half of them whole. And then also focusing on your plate, at least like one meal a day being half fruits or vegetables, you're going to just automatically increase your fiber just by adding in a little bit more color to your plate. So focusing on these more low glycemic or complex carbohydrates are incredibly helpful when balancing out those blood sugar levels. And then kind of as I was already mentioning, in terms of overall carbohydrate consumption, when it comes to consuming those more simple carbohydrates, if we can consume them most of the time, once again, not all of the time because that's unrealistic, but if we can consume them most of the time with protein, healthy fats, and or fiber, that's going to still help to slow down the digestion of those more simple carbohydrates. So like, for example, if you want to have a donut on the weekend with your kids, because who doesn't love a good donut on the weekend? Zach and I had split one this morning at Northern Vessel. It's my freaking favorite. We do it every Saturday, and it's my favorite part. But you know what we had before we went to Northern Vessel? We had a balanced breakfast. Zach had some eggs, and then I think he had some Greek yogurt and some raspberries. I had some raspberries. I had a Chobani Complete with some protein, and then I also had some mush oatmeal with some peanut butter, some fat, some protein, some carbs. We got all that stuff in, and then we enjoyed our donut. And like I said, Zach's a type 1 diabetic, so we can literally watch how things impact his blood sugar. When he eats a well-balanced breakfast before consuming something like a donut, his blood sugar is so much less impacted by the donut than it would be if he ate that in isolation. He actually posted a video on his TikTok the other day comparing like a lemon poppy seed muffin on an empty stomach with like no other nutrients to a, what was it? I think a Jimmy Dean breakfast sandwich where he did, it's got a whole wheat English muffin. It's got protein from the egg white and from the turkey sausage. It's got some fat from the cheese. He showed the difference in the rise in his blood sugar over the course of half an hour without taking any insulin. And you could see the massive difference between the two. And so that's what I oftentimes like to talk about when it comes to these more simple carbohydrates and more this concept of eat what you want and add what you need. Because like pizza, for example, another really great option that a lot of people love to have on the weekends. You don't have to cut out pizza, but instead of the whole pizza that's probably not necessarily going to satisfy you and might not make you feel super good both mentally and physically, add in a protein source like some ground beef or some chicken sausage. Those are both really great pizza addition options. And then maybe have a salad on the side for some extra fiber and some colors. Maybe toss in, if you like sauteed veggies, more frozen sauteed veggies, toss those on a pan with some olive oil, some seasonings. Now you've got a nice little veggie side there too. You're still eating what you want and not restricting yourself from the pizza, but you're adding to it with protein, fat, and or fiber because you know that that's going to support and balance your blood sugar levels a little bit better. You're likely to feel better. Once again, I just want to keep reiterating that's not going to happen every time. If you eat pizza every now and then on its own, that is okay. Like, that is not the end of the world. Once again, we want to be consistent 80% of the time, not be perfect 50% of the time. So that's it on insulin, which I spend a lot of time on that one, but that one's one of my favorite ones to talk about because I think blood sugar balance is such an underrated component of nutrition that honestly I don't feel like a lot of people understand. Now to a big one that we hear all the time. I've already talked about it a little bit, but cortisol. It's often called the stress hormone. It can actually help to control blood sugar levels, regulate metabolism, reduce inflammation, and even assist with memory formulation. So it does a lot of different things within your body, but I think that most people understand that cortisol is highly related to stress and inflammation most often. Now, what is our concern when it comes to cortisol? Like I mentioned in the beginning, that it's not necessarily that we don't want rises and falls in our cortisol because that's absolutely 100% normal. We don't want consistent high levels of stress throughout the course of all the time, essentially. And when we're eating low calorie diets or inadequate nutrition, and then also tying that into over exercising, that can lead to elevated cortisol levels, which can also have an interaction with, like we said, blood sugar control. It can have a reaction with that insulin resistance. It can increase inflammation within the body. It can increase fat storage within the body. There's a variety of things that these elevated levels of cortisol can actually do. I was literally talking to a potential new client the other day, and she was like, I've been, a chronic dieter for years, and I just feel like I'm so inflamed. And like, what do you work on with your clients in terms of reducing inflammation with the body? And I'm like, you might honestly think I sound crazy in saying this, but it comes from the mindset. Like, it comes from how we start to think about and view food. Because if you can view food in a way where food becomes something that is beneficial, and it becomes something that's not scary, and it becomes something that's not anxiety inducing, and you also recognize that you need to eat enough in order to support your body in the most beneficial way, then you're able to reduce that stress that you are constantly putting on your body with the being concerned about the calorie counting, your body's stress of going in and out of diet cycles, your body's stress of being pushed to the limits in the gym, or even inconsistency with being pushed to limits in the gym, because maybe you even go through phases with that when you're yo-yo dieting where you start working out and eating, quote unquote, really healthy at the same time. And then now your body's under an immense amount of stress that it hasn't been under. And then you go back out of that cycle, and not moving your body at all can also be stressful on your body. So making sure that you're finding a balance of all of these things can be super, super helpful in reducing inflammation within the body and also creating a better state of equilibrium. And I don't talk a lot about the ways in which my body has changed over the course of kind of finding intuitive eating and changing the way that I view food, because I think that my body is the least important thing about me. Are there days where I'm still concerned about my body image? Abso-fucking-lutely. Are there days where I still struggle with my ED voice? Also abso-fucking-lutely. But can I also realize at this point in my life that the least interesting thing about me is how my body looks? And can I also be grateful for the things that my body allows me to do? 100%. That just gave me goosebumps saying all of that. But I think that what all of that kind of relates back to in terms of cortisol levels, and something that I've seen specifically, is I can go back and look at photos of myself. I literally shared a video of this on my TikTok a while ago of a picture of me when I was marathon training. So I was running, which this is kind of disordered behavior, so trigger warning, fast forward like a minute if you don't want to hear these things. I was probably training 30, 40 miles a week, which is absolutely fucking absurd. And I do not recommend doing that unless you're like working with a coach who is actually helping you do that. I was not. I was over exercising. I was not following my marathon training plan, which is probably why my marathon went absolutely fucking terrible. But I was marathon training. I was running the most I've ever ran. I was working out the most I ever have. I was strength training. I was running. I was walking. Look, this was also when I was in college. So I was walking to and from class. I would say I was averaging like 20, 30,000 steps a day, which is absolutely absurd. And on top of that, I was also probably eating the least amount that I have ever ate in my life. And the inflammation in my face and my body is absolutely insane. Like, I can remember looking in the mirror and being like, I don't understand why eating so little, like, this is what I've always been told. the less I eat and the more I work out, the better off I'm going to be. The skinnier I'm going to be, the smaller I'm going to be. I need to be the smallest version of myself. These are the things that I need to do. And when I look back at photos, my face was so inflamed, so puffy. I looked drained all the time. And my body was not showing any signs that I was super physically active. Like I was chronically bloated after every single meal that I ate. And now working out the least that I've ever worked out, in the sense of I typically work out 5 days a week. The other 2 days I like to go on walks with my dog, but that's it. I take true rest days. I allow myself that grace. I do 45-minute workouts at most on the days that I'm working out. It's nothing astronomical. And I'm not doing like high intensity classes all the time. I like to do it like once a week now. The other days I strength train, and then I like to walk. Like that is kind of the routine that I'm in. I work out the least I've ever worked out. I eat probably the most food I've ever ate, and I feel the best I've ever felt. I'm the least inflamed that I've ever been, the least amount of bloating that I've ever had. I have consistent menstrual cycles. Like the reason that I go into all of that is because I think a lot of it really does have to do when we're thinking about how can we best support our cortisol levels when it comes from a nutrition standpoint, changing the way in which you view food and eating regular balanced meals to help stabilize your blood sugar levels can significantly reduce the stress on your body. And also recognizing that taking breaks from exercise is super important for your body to get that opportunity to actually recover. And then last but not least too, when it comes to cortisol, there are some foods that may help to reduce inflammation and stress within the body. So things like dark leafy greens, nuts, and seeds, mostly because they contain something called omega-3 fatty acids. We don't get a ton of omega-3 fatty acids in our diet, but they have been linked to decreasing inflammation and stress within the body. You can find them in foods such as fatty fish, flax seeds, and then walnuts. So increasing your consumption of omega-3 fatty acid foods can also be really helpful in terms of supporting your overall cortisol levels. And then, like I mentioned, I'm not going to dive super deep into estrogen and progesterone on this specific episode when it comes to like the way in which they fluctuate throughout the course of the month, but they are something that is really important to overall female health, especially like talking about a menstruating woman. So estrogen actually plays a vital role in the development and regulation of the female reproductive system, and then also secondary sex characteristics. So in terms of estrogen and how it can be impacted from nutrition, diet, and exercise, is that both excessive weight loss and weight gain can lead to a hormonal imbalance when it comes to estrogen. This can affect the estrogen levels, which can then have an impact on the menstrual cycle, fertility, and overall health because estrogen is so dominant in the female body. So making sure that you're kind of staying in that, once again, that steady state of stability and equilibrium, that's what our hormones thrive off of, baby. It's that steady state of equilibrium. But a couple of other things that you can do in terms of supporting your estrogen with food. So cruciferous vegetables, Zach loves that word. He's going to laugh when he listens to this episode because I always joke about it. I struggle. So cruciferous vegetables, broccoli, cauliflower, and Brussels sprouts are higher in a specific type of fiber that's hard to digest. So it can cause gas a lot more significantly. So I avoid them because my tummy and them don't get along. So whenever like we're out and about and I order something that has that, he's like, cruciferous. So I just had to laugh and share that story. But cruciferous vegetables can actually help to support your body's ability to metabolize estrogen. So this is more so if you have high levels of estrogen in your body and different things like that. But cruciferous vegetables also just have a variety of other benefits. So as long as they don't give you tummy trouble, I highly recommend including them in your diet. And then there's also something called phytoestrogen foods. So foods that contain phytoestrogens like flax seeds, soy products, sesame seeds. They may also help to balance out estrogen levels or support, I keep saying balance, but I'm meaning support estrogen levels. You just get so used to that word balance, right? And there is no need to be scared of soy foods and soy products in their relation to estrogen. I'll dive into that more on the episode that I do on cycle syncing in the female cycle. But seriously, you can eat soy foods. I would not be concerned about that whatsoever. And then the last one that we hear a lot when it comes to female health, specifically related to dieting, is thyroid hormone. So T3 and T4. I feel like most people have heard of their thyroid, have heard of the thyroid hormones T3 and T4. They're ones that are typically taken when you go do like a yearly physical. They're ones that are checked in on a lot. So they actually help to regulate metabolism, energy generation, and then overall growth and development. So once again, where these can really be impacted and affected, and like we talked about, T3 and T4 are really important for regulating your overall metabolism. The main concern is that dieting, especially when it involves severe caloric restriction, so once again, eating below that basal metabolic rate, it can actually affect thyroid hormone production. This could potentially lead to a slowdown of metabolism and making weight management more difficult when you're going on and off these restrictive periods of dieting. So once again, just kind of another way that restrictive dieting really negatively impacts the overall metabolism is affecting these T3 and T4 hormones. Now, I want to preface any of these recommendations with this stuff is not necessarily, there's nothing bad about including these things in your diet, but if you are someone who doesn't really struggle a whole lot with your thyroid hormones, like when you go to the doctor, they're within range, you probably don't necessarily need to do a ton of additional support for your thyroid function. However, if you are someone who's gone to the doctor's office and you have struggled with your T3 or T4 hormones, something that you can include in your diet that can help to support these specifically is selenium. So that can be found in Brazil nuts, sunflower seeds, and then a variety of fish. And then iodine, which can be found in seaweed, dairy, and eggs, or iodized salt. So if you're using salt and you're using an iodized version, that's the perfect way to support your body with that specific nutrient. And then last but not least, once again, intuitive eating can help to benefit thyroid health and overall vitality because it helps you to pay attention to how foods actually affect your overall energy levels. So when it comes to like the 6 main hormones, those are some of the best ways that you can kind of support your body. As you can see, a lot of them have a very similar trend. But then I also wanted to just sum up general tips for hormonal support through nutrition and intuitive eating, because I think that when we're kind of thinking about the best ways to support our body, once again, it's very bio-individual, and I definitely recommend if you're struggling with a lot of symptoms that you see associated with hormone stuff, highly recommend talking to a registered dietitian, OBGYN, someone that you feel very trustworthy and comfortable with. But some general things that we can all do to support our bodies and our hormones in the best way possible. Hydration. Super fucking simple, but drink your water, ladies. And also, if you are someone who is out there drinking a gallon of water a day and you're not really eating a whole lot of salt in your diet, make sure that you're also getting in electrolytes. So the electrolytes, sodium, magnesium, potassium, chloride, there's a couple of other different ones too, but they're just very important for actually absorbing the amount of water that you drink. And like I mentioned, water can be intoxicating up to a certain point. I've actually seen quite a few TikTok videos. This is so alarming. Quite a few TikTok videos of girls who did the 75 hard, and obviously you cut out like a variety of different foods that, you know, obviously processed, stupid term, but foods that are more processed tend to have a little bit more salt in them. And then if you are not salting your food and you're drinking gallons of water in a day, it can lead to something called hyponatremia, where your sodium levels are too high or too low and your water levels are too high. So making sure that if you are drinking a lot of water and you notice that your urine is clear, we don't want clear urine. We want slightly yellow urine. That means that we're actually absorbing some of the water that we're intaking. And if you're noticing that you're peeing constantly and you have clear urine, electrolytes might be your friend. My personal favorite ones are Relight. I get them at RGM Lifetime, but they're great. Listening to your body is the second tip. So intuitive eating emphasizes the importance of listening to your body's cues, those hunger and fullness hormones. This can help to naturally guide you towards foods and eating patterns that support your overall hormonal health. We talked about a variety of ways in which intuitive eating can really support your body being in more stability or equilibrium, so I won't really dive in too much further on that one. A diverse whole food based diet. So the reason that I mention a diverse whole food based diet is because obviously we know that whole foods, so things like whole grains, dairy, beans, nuts, seeds, fruits, vegetables, all of those things have a variety of nutrient density that's really important. But what we also know about our body is that having a variety of these things means that we get a variety of different nutrition, right? We get a different measure of vitamins and minerals. We get a different measure of the macronutrients, carbohydrates, proteins, and fats. So making sure that we're adding in variety is super important for one, not only supporting your overall hormonal health with a variety of different vitamins and minerals, but you're also supporting your gut microbiome. Something that we know for a fact is that the gut thrives off of variety because that's how it's able to kind of expand and diversify. And so making sure that you're eating a variety of those different whole foods, mixing up the colors of the fruits and vegetables that you're eating, mixing up the protein sources that you're consuming, just finding ways to have fun with food again, which is something that I also love about intuitive eating, because I think that when you get into those restrictive dieting periods, you eat the same thing over and over again. And it's not necessarily a bad thing to have hyperfixations. Like, we all have those. I have those. Kodiak cakes for breakfast, Chobani completes. We know the deal. Mush oatmeal. All hyperfixations for me that I absolutely love eating on a daily basis. But I also do try to make sure that we have a variety throughout the course of the week of the different things that we're eating so that we're getting that variety of nutrition. And then managing stress. So this is overall just managing stress in your life. And I'm calling the kettle black here because I don't do a good job of managing stress. And the reason I'm saying that is because my husband listens to every episode. And I know that if I don't mention that I'm not good at this one, he's going to be like, you on your podcast said you need to manage stress and you don't manage your stress. I'm like, I know, Zachary. I don't manage my stress super well, but I am trying. I'm trying. And a couple of things that I do in order to help me manage stress, I like to go to therapy. That has made a huge difference in my life. Getting sunshine. I am not kidding you. When I step out into the sunshine, every ounce of depression that has ever been in my body floats away. Every ounce of stress. Listen to a junk podcast. Listen to something, well, maybe you listen to my podcast, which I hope is a junk podcast. What I mean by junk podcast, listen to something like that's reality TV on a podcast. I love doing that when I go on a walk to just kind of zone out, enjoy nature, enjoy the sunshine. And especially as we're kind of getting into spring where the weather is a little bit nicer for us Midwest girlies, it's so nice to get out into the sunshine. Going on walks, meditation, not something that I'm good at, but if it works for you, I love that for you. Deep breathing, the way in which a deep breath in and a deep breath out changes the way you can feel is incredible. Also a hug, like I literally, when my husband gives me a hug, the stress just melts off of my body. Like recognizing these things that can help you to manage your stress in little ways is really beneficial when we live in just a very stressful culture. And then I think we're on number 4. Yeah, we're on number 4. Engaging in exercise that makes you feel good. We know this. I talk about this all the time, but the more you enjoy the type of exercise that you're doing, the more likely you are to do it. So find ways that you genuinely enjoy moving your body, because that's going to be something that you engage in so much more often. And like we talked about, that consistent movement is so beneficial for your body in a variety of ways. And then bonus points if it is outdoors or in nature, because we know that nature, sunshine, all of those things can give you a lot of that decrease in stress. It can give you a serotonin boost, all of those different things. So engaging in exercise that makes you feel good. And trust me, Midwest girlies, I understand we can't always be outside, but try to be outside if you can. Prioritizing sleep. Sleep is so fucking underrated. And I'm sorry to all my mothers who are listening to me. I'm not talking to you because I know you're prioritizing sleep in the best way possible. But to those of us who don't have kiddos yet, if you can prioritize your sleep and get as much of it as possible, that is going to benefit your health in so many different ways. Sleep ties into so many different things. Like I am learning so much with my Aura Ring, like the connection that sleep has to my recovery, the connection that it has a connection to your ghrelin and leptin hormones. It can actually increase your hunger when you're not getting enough sleep and down-regulate your ghrelin or your satisfaction hormone. So it can lead to overall increased consumption of food, different things like that. Sleep is incredibly important for a variety of different things. So prioritizing sleep, highly recommend. Last but not least, minimizing alcohol. Alcohol is one of the very few known toxins that we have scientific evidence on for humans, because once again, you are not a rat, you are a human. So minimizing your alcohol intake, which I will have a solution to this in a couple months with Peche, which we're getting our first iteration of the beverage in about a month. I will share all the details on my story, Peche's story, all the things when that time comes. But minimizing alcohol can help to decrease inflammation within the body. It can also help to just increase your overall, we know that alcohol is also a depressant, so it can also help to increase your mood. It can help to increase your mental health. So minimizing that alcohol consumption, once again, moderation is key. You don't have to cut alcohol out if you don't want to, but minimizing it may help to support your hormones and benefit your body in a multitude of ways. So now that we've talked all things hormones. I hope that you feel better equipped to siphon, that's not a word, but sift through the information on the internet and figure out what is BS and what is not. And make sure you are checking to see what credentials someone has if they are talking about balancing hormones. And also, when it comes to your bio-individual hormones, get them checked before buying any supplement, before, doing any sort of protocol. Make sure that that's actually what's going on before you just blindly trust a wellness influencer who might just be trying to sell you something. So, on today's episode of what is it that I'm saying? Like something about the trend. I don't remember, breaking down the trend, whatever it is. I hope you feel like you learned a lot about your hormones today. And once again, thank you for listening to another episode of the Simply Balanced podcast. This is one of my favorite things that I get to do, and I'm so appreciative of all of the feedback that I've gotten so far. Episodes release every Tuesday morning at 6 a.m., and I am so excited for next week's episode because I'm going to have one of my content creator besties, Taylor Croyle, on my podcast. We are going to talk all things content creation. It's going to be just like a little bestie chat next week. So I'm super excited to just kind of have like a different vibe because I feel like the last couple episodes have been very science-based. So I'm ready for like a fun, happy-go-lucky episode. So stay tuned for that next week. And as always, thank you for listening. I love you all. And that brings us to the end of today's episode of Simply Balanced. Thank you so much for tuning in and sharing a part of your day with me. I hope you find inspiration in our discussion and feel more equipped to embrace the balanced girl aesthetic in your daily life. Remember, balance is a journey, not a destination. It's about finding what works for you in your unique way. As we part ways, I encourage you to reflect on one thing you learned today and how you can incorporate that into your life to create more balance. Don't forget to subscribe to Simply Balanced so you never miss an episode. If you enjoyed our time together, consider leaving a review or sharing the podcast with a friend. Your support means the world, and until next time, keep striving for balance, nourish your body and mind, and remember to cherish life's simple pleasures. This is Taylor Grasso signing off. Stay balanced and see you next episode.